What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Homie Hangout, where we help others move in excellence. You guys, let me know what you think of the thumbnail. I see the trend on YouTube, a lot of channels using AI to make their thumbnails. This is my kind of first attempt at going that route completely. And so let me know what you think, right? Maybe I'll keep it up, maybe I won't. It didn't come out exactly like I wanted, but I'm back in California now, so I got the computer and all that. And I wanted the front two faces to represent the likeness of actual individuals on YouTube who talk all kinds of nonsense about me, which is fine. It's not worth the video. But I didn't feel like it transferred over that well, so I went ahead and put name tags on them. Just having a little fun, right? It's nothing that serious. I do think that should they get incarcerated again in the prison system, which I hope they don't. I don't wish that on anybody. They would be prime candidates for this new gang, this new clique, which is called the Noans. So what's the story with the Noans? They are an EOP gang, right? And EOP is enhanced outpatient. So there's a lot of people in prison that have mental health issues, of course. And the base level is called triple CMS. And I don't remember exactly what it stands for. It's correctional case management system, but I'm missing a C in there, something like that. And it's people who have mental health issues and they're diagnosed medication. And a lot of times we would call that hot meds because certain psych meds that you take, you can't be outside, I guess, when it's hotter than 90 degrees out. The only place I was really on the yard that had triple CMS people was Solano. Building 2 was reserved for them. And when it got hot outside, they got to go in the day room and they got access to ice and all this other stuff that the rest of us didn't get. But otherwise, they programmed on the yard with us. EOP is a level above that. Those are designated yards where I guess you're more crazy or something. I don't know. But I've noticed on YouTube, some of the folks that were on SNY yards would talk about EOP yards. And apparently that has become a hustle over the years. I don't remember there being a lot of EOP yards when I was in prison, but that's not necessarily something I paid attention to be quite honest. But I don't think there was as many as there are now. And apparently those yards, you get a lot of drugs, right? Because it's all a bunch of JCats. And you have access to a lot more free staff, mental health workers and other people from the community who work in the prison but are not correctional officers. And I guess the mindset of some of the people on the PC yards is if you JCat out and go to the EOP yard, you can wind up cracking, one of those free staff, one of those females, and getting all the resources that come from that. I don't know. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me because I don't relate to like wanting to be a JCat or pretending to be a JCat and then having to be housed around a bunch of legitimately screws loose people. I remember in Solano, there was a dude, and I've mentioned this before, but he would come out and he had his sack lunch from breakfast and he would come out to the yard and on the main wall where they have the kitchen and the center complex and the MTAs and everything else, there's a drain pipe that came out of the wall, maybe a couple feet off the ground. And he would sit there with his food and feed the drain pipe, right? Like stuff his food in there. And one day he was putting an apple or something and it kept rolling out. And he was yelling at this pipe like, look at all I do for you. Like having a very aggressive, you could tell he was really worked up. But he was yelling at a fucking drain pipe on the wall. I remember watching him like, man, that dude don't belong in prison. He belongs in a hospital, I don't know what he did to get in there, whatever, not my business. But so those people, like I said, were around in Solano. I wasn't around them in any other prisons. When I went to Vacaville for surgery, I'm sure that there was those people there, but I was never able to go out to the yard. So there's a history of these guys, and apparently the hustle is to become EOP. I couldn't imagine doing time around a bunch of those folks, right? Like that. I think that would make you crazy if you weren't already. So I don't know. Apparently that's a hustle for some people. And you guys, if you're familiar with it, let me know in the comments kind of what your experiences are, what you've heard. But that's the feedback I've got. Also, apparently now EOP people don't get punished the same for shit that they do, right? So they can blast somebody, they can fire on somebody, they can do a lot of stuff, and they don't face the same legal repercussions because they're a JCAT. And so I think some people have ended up on those yards that way. You know, they blast somebody on an S&Y yard, and then when they catch the case, they're like, no, I wasn't in my right mind. I was hearing voices, and they're like, okay, and put you over there. I'm not aware of people going from active yards or general population yards to the EOP. I guess it's possible. But now, right, just another indicator of the failure of CDC and the administration and how they're doing stuff. They've allowed this to continue. They've allowed people to fake being JCATs and go over to the EOP yards to such an extent that there's now an EOP gang. And like 10 days ago, right, a week and a half ago, their debut, so to speak, was in Tehachapi in a riot. And they took off on the 2.5ers and blasted a bunch of them like they were with the business, and just went to town, right? And apparently were chanting and yelling on the yard. And you can only imagine, you know, kind of sky's the limit when it comes to that population of people. And so they've planted their flag, you know, that they are the Noans. That's the name of the gang, the Noans. And I don't know if they're going to go at it with other PC gangs or if it's just the 2.5ers. I've heard that the 2.5ers are the largest S&Y gang, and they tend to try to bully people when they got the numbers. So maybe that was part of it. But CDC is crazy, man, right now in just the level of gangs that exist. And I use the word kind of loosely, but gangs are popping up everywhere. In my time, I think it would have been hard to imagine EOP gang members. Now, like, for example, in Solano, when we had Northerners that were in building 2, they were still embraced. Like, we still checked paperwork and kind of the bare minimum. But if they were like, hey, fool, I'm just playing it off. We're like, look, you got to stop playing it off then, right? And if they really were on meds, again, they were embraced, but they were definitely kept at arm's distance. You know, they weren't privy to any information. They weren't participating in any education. They didn't have any responsibilities. They didn't have to come out every unlock, and there just wasn't the same expectations. We checked their paperwork to make sure that they didn't have weird charges. And sure, when they came out to the yard, they kind of came over to our side of the yard. But all total, there wasn't many of those guys. You know, it's not like there was 10 of them or anything. Every now and then they would sprinkle through, and generally they weren't too serious about their affiliation, and they kind of just did their own thing, you know, because they're a liability, right? They're mentally unstable, and you don't want mentally unstable people around you in an environment like prison. A lot of people don't want mentally unstable people around them anywhere. You know, you get on the train and you see some JCat in that car, you're probably going to move to a different car, right? Or move to a different table in a restaurant or whatever. You try to keep your distance because you never know. And I think Toro's behavior, that's why he's on the thumbnail, is a great example of that lately. You know, he's just taking flight on people, you know, and so who wants to be around that kind of stuff? But it's a failure of CDC that in their effort years ago to try to break down prison gangs and try to remove the manpower of prison gangs in the general population, they opened up these S&Y yards and kind of let anybody flip and fold and go over there. And then you have this S&Y gang phenomenon, right? And now they've let a bunch of these S&Y guys kind of fake the funk and go to the EOP side. You got fucking EOP gang members, right? It's just gangs on top of gangs on top of gangs. It's pretty ridiculous, in my opinion. I don't know exactly how Tehachapi is designed. I know it's been on fire lately, right? They had the guy that killed his cellie, I think a couple days ago. They had an attempted murder on a CO, I think yesterday. some guy during yard recall came out and slashed the CO, and I don't know if he hit other ones or what. You had this riot, like a week and a half ago. So Tehachapi in general is just, like I said, kind of on fire. I don't know if those things are all happening on the same yards or what's going on. The thing with the EOP dudes is, again, from my understanding, you can't really punish them, right? Because it's sort of like pleading insanity when you catch a case on the streets, except there's a high threshold to legitimately plead insanity in a court of law. CDC clearly doesn't have that same level of threshold. And on one hand, I'm all for providing services to people with mental health issues. I don't think prison is an appropriate place for people with mental health issues. They need help, right? They need hospitals, they need medical care, and maybe they need to be removed from society if they're violent or unpredictable or whatever. But the idea is, if you get them appropriate treatment, then they get in their right mind and they won't behave the same way. So I'm all for those folks getting services and getting help. I don't think prison is the right place. But letting people fake it and then go over there and corrupt that for those who really do have mental health issues. There are people who belong over there in terms of, they're locked up and they're in prison and they have this stuff. And so to have these guys over there popping at all the females and trying to knock pipelines and everything else, you're taking away from the services of these guys who really need it. And some of them, I think, are a little bit more sophisticated criminals than some of these J-Cats that don't even know what their name is, and then this is what you get. Somebody goes over there and starts the gang. And I'm making some assumptions here because I don't exactly know, but that scenario kind of makes sense to me, because they've had EOPs for years and I've never heard of an EOP gang. Again, I've heard of SNY gang members going EOP, but then they don't really even push their PC gang stuff over there because there's a bunch of J-Cats. Who you gonna push that on? Like, you don't get no stripes for flexing on people with fucking Down syndrome or something. And apparently that has changed. Or maybe they were getting picked on, kind of like the GBGs, right? The gay folks, I guess they got picked on enough that they just decided to start a gang. I don't know. It's wild. I am eternally grateful that I'm not in prison. This is why I don't behave in ways that could lead me to go back to prison day to day out here in the streets. Because the California Department of Corrections is in some ways radically different than it was when I was doing time in the 90s and early 2000s. So there you have it. Just quick little video. There's a new gang in town, the Noans, and they're violent and they're with the business apparently. And they probably are not going to be punished for the stuff that they do, which in some way could make them even more dangerous and make them even more attractive. But I don't know. You guys, let me know what you think. Have you heard of this? And what are your thoughts on it? Man, help others move in excellence. That's what homies do. Help yourself at the same time because you're worth it. Help your community because they need you. Stay tuned because I have a video dropping on the reaction channel. I should have said this earlier because by now most of you have already tuned out. But I'm going to try to drop a video on the reaction channel today, Rascal Reacts. I'll link to that at the end of this video, which is right now. All right, you guys, take care.